All good. Start the recording for the folks that are running late and can't make it. Michael Kravitz is joining in from Ohio, so we'll let him join in. Everyone, I assume, I think everyone here has done whiskey tastings. Even though it's a joint for the first time, you guys have glasses. We don't need to go over that. Some of these are like, we're starting from scratch. In the first half hour, we're going to talk about glassware and water. We're all set, so I think we're all going to be ready to go here. Um, And with these, actually, Alan is in the UK, so he's what is about 808 there now.
Yeah, it's about 808, yeah.
So we like to just run and gun with these, and a lot of folks here know each other. We'll have plenty of time after the tasting. We usually try to keep it at 2 hours. We can chat and get to know each other for those that haven't, but we like to just dive in. And so Michael just joined from Ohio. Harold just joined from Brooklyn, New York. Good to see you both. I'll put the dram lineup once more, and I'll do it periodically in the chat. But without further ado, thank you so much for joining. My name is James Walton. I started this brand called Pure Malts years ago now, and we just launched a new website. And I had to post up with the guy that was helping me build it all the previous events. And there's a lot of events that we did, in person, hybrid, virtual. It's a lot. And so thank you all for joining. Thank you for the support. One of the key characteristics of all the tastings I like to do is I sat in like hundreds and hundreds of tastings over the years, and a lot of them would be, a brand ambassador like Alan, that would talk about some core range stuff, and it's kind of like you're laboring through these drams, and you get to like the one good dram and all that, and it's just like goes on and on. So one of the things that I've been trying to do is just really secure stellar whiskey, really keep it at cost. Some of these bottles now are going for over $1,000, but I bought them luckily at certain points, so we've all been able to share in that. So thank you for that support, so I can actually get rid of liquid too. But that's really been the goal, is that this is accessible. There is no right or wrong with any of this. Any of you joining for the first time, share any notes, ideas, thoughts. We all learn together. None of us actually know anything about whiskey. Some of us know a lot about it, but then at the same time, we know nothing about it. When we see things like this, where we taste like a Laphroaig STR cask, like it's my first time. I don't know if anyone else has had it, but those are some of the really cool memories. Those are those memories that really stick with you. And we'll certainly save time at the end to talk about maybe what everyone's favorite is and all that. But with that, I'd like to introduce our host, Alan Wood. This is probably your fifth or sixth time that I've like snatched your time away from your girlfriend and your job. He was there at the very first time I got into whiskey in Scotland, in Edinburgh. Jeff and his lovely wife Dee are going to be seeing him, I think, next week, it sounds like. So I'm sure you guys will have a really great time. Alan is a Scotch whiskey ambassador, really all things spirits ambassador as well. He is a brand ambassador at SMWS. He's a bartender at SMWS. He's been at least 2 locations now, at Queen Street in Edinburgh, now at Glasgow and Bath Street. If you haven't been there, check it out. It's a beautiful location. Without further ado, Alan's our host. He'll take us through this journey, and go ahead and guide us.
Well, good evening, folks. Thank you, James, for the wonderful introduction. Like I said, my name's Alan Wood. Just first of all, hi guys, and hopefully we will see you guys at SMWS Bath Street in the near future in Glasgow as well. So we'll be kind of sort of ambling through some of these whiskies here today. What I always say when I do these tastings is, first of all, you're not in university. This is not Freshers Week. This is not kind of drink your drams the quick as possible kind of thing. Sit them, savor them, add a bit of water to them. And in the industry, I apologize if anybody's heard this before, but I've had so many people tell me they had different levels of water. They had 1 drop for every year that it's been in the cask, 1 drop for every centimeter of copper piping in the distillery, 1 drop for every time the cask has been turned counterclockwise while the distillery manager walked around the dunnage. There's an easier way of doing it. This is your whiskey. I would encourage you guys, add water to it. You'll get it opening up in the glass, but kind of after that, it is your stuff to play around with. The company I work for is the Scotch Malt Whisky Society. So for those of you that don't know who we are an independent bottler. We do things on a cask by cask basis. We are primarily a membership-driven organization. I'm doing this tasting kind of off the books, so just kind of give you guys a bit of a sort of peek behind the scene as well. A bit about my history. My degree and master's degree is actually in archaeology. So I kind of stumbled into the whiskey industry and haven't stumbled back out again. I've worked for the society now for going on about 7 or 8 years. So I've been there for a good bit of time now. I started off at the Queen Street arm of the company when the Kaleidoscope public bar was open. I then stayed on and then came through to the Glasgow Bath Street venue. And so if you do ever pop by Bath Street, I know certainly Jeff and we will see you guys soon, I hope. But so this here is what I really kind of find really interesting about the society, is because the whiskies that are available in each of our countries sometimes differ from country to country. So in the US market, for example, there was a parcel of distillery number 29. Now, for those of you that don't know our coding system, the number before your decimal point is your distillery identifier. The number after is your cask number. Depending on what venue you go to, certainly if you come to Bath Street, we will guide you through distilleries. We won't kind of focus so much on flavor profiles. But if you go to Queen Street or Leith, sometimes they kind of ask you to go by flavor profile. For me, my philosophy is kind of just tell me what you like. I'll find you something kind of close-ish to it or what you're after as well. 29 is one of these kind of much sought after numbers for society members as well. It is Laphroaig or Laphroaig or any other 6 ways and Sundays that you can pronounce it. 9 times out of 10, I've heard every way of pronouncing it underneath the sun. So really what I would say is, as long as it sounds somewhere close, we know where we're coming from. Just if anybody's interested, Laphroaig comes from the Gaelic for the open, for the beautiful hollow by the Broad Bay. Laphroaig is located just near Port Ellen as well on Islay. Islay is an interesting area in Scotland. So in Scottish whisky, we have 3 protected regions. That's your lowlands, your highlands, and your Speysiders. And you have 2 protected localities. This is your Campbelltown and your Islay whiskies. This is where I don't perhaps agree with the Scottish Whisky Association. There is, for me, a 5th region, another region, which is the islands. So your Highland Parks, your Juras, your Taliskers, but that's kind of my cross to bear. So, but enough about me chatting on. We'll kind of get stuck into the whiskey. This is 29.248. This is a really interesting dram for me because I have never had this whiskey before. This is a completely new experience. And like James was saying, he messaged me when we went down to the first pandemic. I said, how do you feel about jumping on and doing a Sherry 29 tasting? And I was like, yes. And so most of these drams there were drams that I'd never had. And again, this is one of them as well, because we can see the whiskies that are being sent to the external markets. And this was one that was sent to the US market as well. So second fill charred red wine barrique finished on a bourbon hoggy. Really nice, interesting flavors, interesting color as well. I've actually sort of held myself off and not even tried it yet. So just judging by the color alone, it's got a fantastic wee nose to it because the wine cask is not coming through. And this is what I find really interesting about it. You're not getting that winey note coming through.
Yeah, this is one of those, this has become a legendary bottle now, and so Matt Lauren helped secure. Maybe I shouldn't tell them that, Matt, because now everyone's going to contact you saying, "Hey, can you help me get like?"
Well, I'm down to the last 4 now, so what am I going to do? I can't help anybody out.
A hell of a price at the time. Help me out, maybe 2018, something like that, 2019 in that time frame.
Yeah, it was like 2018.
And this is when we used to go to the tastings in New York, and Alan, so we used to see 29s like once a month almost. And then it was just like quickly going. And so by the time it started to get really hot, the prices started going up and it got scary. You just couldn't get it. But a hell of a price at the time for something that's very unique. It's become legendary here where you just don't see it often. You don't see it at auction often. And so when I found out that Matt had an extra, I just begged and pleaded. I traded him a lot of favors to bring this bottle to this tasting. So thank you, Matt, and I hope you all enjoy it too. It's very, very unique.
Nah, thank you, man. I was happy to help. And I think what was the negotiation was you got it at cost plus the ticket. So I think that was a fair trade. You'd have to pay the markup of today's prices. So
Exactly.
Definitely what I find really interesting is often the Society very recently released a Strathmill for the UK market. I don't know if it's made it to the US yet, but it was called Well Red, and it was finished off in a first fill red wine barrique. And that was brilliant, kind of just vibrant red color. If you were to order this in a shop or a bar and just have that poured to you and be told it was finished off in a charred red wine, second fill, you wouldn't think there is no other cask influence because it's that classic straw gold off the bourbon character. And I don't know if you noticed on the Society bottle, for those of you that aren't members, we employ flavor profiles. So this would come under oily and coastal flavor profile as well. I always say with flavor profiles, take them with a pinch of salt. They are not hard gospel truth at the end of the day.
I think it predates the profiles.
It's I think it's got a blue strip on it.
Oh no, this
Oh,
is blue.
okay.
Yeah, this one's blue strip. Yeah, oily. Yeah, I don't know a lot of oily coastal 29s. There's been maybe a couple, maybe a small handful. By the way, if anything anyone hears here is a little bit too nerdy out or nerded out or specific on SMWS, please ask. It is a very complicated company. It's very, like, I still don't understand half the stuff. I think we had a 30-minute conversation about what dictates a black label. We did a black label tasting, and Alan told us the logic for it, and then it was like the next day, and then they threw it all out, and now it's completely different. So it's a very difficult transition to independent bottle like this. So if anything doesn't make sense, please ask.
What I would always say as well is just when I'm talking as well, if anybody's got any questions, queries, they'll come in the chat, jump in. This is not a lecture. This is not a discussion. And I don't know if you noticed when I tried that whiskey, I went very quiet all of a sudden. And if you've ever heard me in the venues, I don't shut up. I kind of speak all the time and I'm floating about. So for a whiskey to make me sit down and go, that's unusual, that is a really nice example of sort of a really interesting level of spirit. Now, 29 is a very interesting distillery for us because 29 is considered one of the big boys of Islay. It's Laphroaig. And the society has always had a unique relationship with Islay because we were owned by Ardbeg forever. Well, we were owned by Glenmorangie, owned by default LVMH and then Ardbeg. And Laphroaig has always been this kind of competing influence with Ardbeg on Islay, where Ardbeg's your kind of greasy, dirty, meaty kind of style notes, whereas Laphroaig is TCP, Germaline, like kind of really acidically medicinal kind of style of whiskey. And where Laphroaig gets this medicinal style from is the sort of high concentration of sphagnum moss in their peat as well. So sphagnum moss and decaying heather and decaying seaweed. And that's what I find really interesting. For me, this doesn't taste like a kind of classic SMWS Laphroaig, because in the UK, we've been used to getting young, under 10 years old, ex-bourbon cask, big, fiery, punchy monsters. Whereas this is a much more older, sort of relaxed style. And if you've ever tried the Laphroaig Quarter Cask, for example, that was the whiskey I grew up on. That was my first ever Scottish dram. And now I'm noticing there's been a slight change in the recipe or a slight change in something where it's just not quite the same flavor I was used to. And what I really like about it here is Laphroaig being the size that it is and being the kind of international sort of market that it's hit, it only produces 3.3 million litres per annum of spirit. And when you compare that to some of the mainland distilleries, that's very small numbers for the distillery of that size. And what I find really interesting with Islay is its own wee kind of microclimate of distilleries, because there's new distilleries opening up time and time and time again. And each distillery manages to produce, even though they have one malting plant, produce all these different degrees of whiskies as well. And just to agree with Jeff, I do get that wee bit of an ashiness to it. And I did a cigar and whiskey tasting up at the Dakota House Hotel in Scotland, in Glasgow, sorry, fairly recently. And this was one of the, I wish I'd had this on the tasting because it's gonna be that interesting flavor. But just to kind of touch very briefly on Harold's comment about going to be expanding soon, the Society of Laphroaig is going to be drying up potentially. We're finding it harder and harder to acquire casks. So it is going to be one of these more difficult whiskies to see in these more difficult numbers coming forward. I am hoping once Laphroaig has gone through this expansion phase that it does the same that Arran did, which is kind of expanded and then pulled all the bottlings from us and then has started re-releasing back to us. Because Arran 121 is one of our largest cask allocations in our warehouse in Glasgow as well. But this for me is a fantastic wee dram. It's got that wonderful kind of decaf Islay, not heavy Laphroaig, very much a gateway into the world of these kind of big, brassy, bold, peaty malts to it as well. And also as well as one of the most kind of famous members of the Laphroaig distillery is Bessie Williamson, of course, one of the first females in whiskey distilling, took over in 1954. But it's going to be interesting to see how they sort of preserve this heritage, because it also has the royal warrant for King Charles as well. But this certainly for me is a cracking example from quite a unique distillery on Islay that doesn't do their standard core ranges, with the exception of a few. They don't do what Ardbeg does, which is to get the fermentations, the kind of but bizarre barbecue, the kind of where Ardbeg messes around your standard pro forma distilling. Laphroaig do know what they do, and they do it very well indeed, I would say. But I don't know if anybody else has any other thoughts for the dram, or
Yeah, what does everybody think? This is Al and I talked right before this and thought this was a great jam to start off with.
Drop of water really releases it. You get more flavors. I get some of that custardy, some of that red wine flavors start to come out.
what's quite interesting as well is the Laphroaig new make comes off at 63.5, so that's their casking strength. That's the strength they put into casks. So this has lost a fair degree of alcoholic percentage over the time as well. And I definitely agree with Martin as well, is that this is it's not got that medicinal kind of old school Isla brassy peaty notes to it. It's much more well balanced, I would say. So shall we progress on to the second dram?
Yeah, I think that was a really nice start.
Yeah,
Alan or James, can you describe the cask on the first one?
So it was a bourbon hogshead put into a charred red wine barrique. So what that means is the charring aspect. So the society does a process known as re-racking. So what we will do is we'll take spirit from one cask and chuck it into another cask as well. The bourbon cask, we actually know Laphroaig are not. Some distilleries are very careful about where they say their bourbon casks are from. Laphroaig aren't. They openly advertise this, and with just a couple of minutes searching, I was actually able to find this out. And it's made using Maker's Mark ex-bourbon cask from Kentucky. So I find that quite interesting, because they're very transparent about this. The charred red wine is probably something we've done. So that's a re-racking process that we've done at the society. We tend to re-rack for about 1 to 2 years. So we'll buy the whiskey at age X. So this one here being a 21-year-old, I guess we probably purchased this at about 14, 15 years old, or maybe younger, in a bourbon cask, matured it, and then at a certain point we thought, right, we've got to re-rack it into a red wine cask. But what was interesting was that when we were owned by LVMH, we paid a pittance for these casks because we were just part of the whiskey industry. And now that we've kind of gone independent and owned by Artisanal Spirits now, we actually are seeing a change in our pricing structure for the whiskey casks that we're buying as well. But what I really like about it is that we're seeing a change, but we're also seeing distilleries coming to see us that haven't seen us for a long time. Ardbeg is probably going to be one of the ones that we miss, because Ardbeg, they just charge us too much for casks more than anything else. But these kind of different kind of styles we got a really nice inheritance from LVMH, and this is probably, tentatively speaking, one of these inherited casks where we've had this cask and we've done a further re-racking process with it. I don't know if it's made it to the US yet, but we don't always get re-racking right. We have stuffed it a couple of times. There was a whiskey released in the UK. I don't know if it got dropped in the US yet. It's Experimental Batch 1. Now, Experimental Batch 1 is a 27-year-old single cask whiskey that has been stuffed full of Scotch bonnet peppers.
I was going to ask if this is the chili whiskey.
Yeah, if it gets released, I recommend trying it. It's really unique and different. But this was kind of a back burner from the Tabasco cask fiasco we did many years ago. And I think the re-racking process is something the society is still working through. And certainly, I think this is a really good example of, I think it's just a refill ex-bourbon cask. So I suspect the bourbon cask was quite tired and quite kind of not at the kind of sort of full of vibrancy and flavor that they were looking for, and they've re-racked it into a red wine just to give it that extra push, that extra kind of cherries, a little bit of kind of vanilla and cinnamon coming through as well, I would say. So that's a wee bit about the cask, and I hope that helps more than anything else.
I like what Mike said about adding a little bit of water. It definitely brought out a lot more flavors too. It's really interesting.
Oh, definitely. I think water, really interesting with water in Laphroaig is that some society whiskies, for me, don't need that bit of water because they're smooth as is. Laphroaig is one of these ones that needs that little extra just push over the edge more than anything else.
The wine notes on here are a little bit subdued, but you can really find it if you look for it. This reminds me a lot of one of the core range 25's, where the peat is very subdued. It's not very heavily peated. Very easy dram to drink, very easy. I don't know what the ABV is on those, but this reminds me of that quite a lot.
I think the 25 ABV is low 40s, I think, because certainly proprietary, they don't tend to bottle anywhere up past 45.
Well, if anybody else has anything else on this dram, hopefully you enjoyed it. We can start pouring 29.213. And Alan, correct me if I'm wrong, I think I have the right lineup, so you tell me if I step
Oh
out.
yeah, look, this is...
It's all by ABV, right? The lineup looks like.
Yeah, pretty much. We've gone by kind of ABV connoisseur. So traditionally with whiskey tasting, sometimes we would start with the highest ABV and finish with the lowest. For me, I've started with my own personal tasting, starting with the lower ABVs and working up, especially when dealing with cask strength whiskey, because you can get something called palate fatigue, where once you've had 4 or 5 drams, your palate's not kind of working to the same degree more than anything else.
Yeah. What about the sherry one? Because that one, we guessed the lineup or the order. We put the sherry one, or at least we think it's sherry, the colored one at the end.
So
it's not sherry. There is a sherry one, but it's very lightly sherried. It's the actual farewell something. The STR cask, I believe, is the one you're talking about. That's the one that's darker. I don't even know the ABV, but we have that third, actually.
Yeah. Okay. It's STR. Okay.
So STR is shaved toast recharge, but we'll touch on that when we jump into that one there. But this one here is, for me, I think it's really interesting because it's got that kind of slightly higher ABV being closer to what I would expect from an age of this cask as well. It's 20 years old, I believe. 20 years old, ex-bourbon cask as well. Deep, dark, and desirable. Now, this will just give you an idea of kind of the label itself. Will give you an idea of how old this whiskey was for the society. Is that this was released a fair amount of years ago, and just when I joined the society, I think, if I remember correctly. But this was before, so this kind of cost was actually relatively amicable for the UK market, because everything over £150 received a different labeling more than anything else. And this, again, I would say is probably going to be one of our inherited stocks from LVMH. So we probably purchased this at a fairly young age. Laphroaig kind of has a really interesting kind of peatiness to it as well, and has a very unique one. So their peat bay is from the Machrie Moor, and what I really like about it is that you've got that mix of heather, lichen, seaweed, and moss, and sort of decaying seaweed and that kind of stuff. But if you go on the websites, if you go on the Laphroaig website, and there's always this great big debate about salt in Scottish single malt whiskey. Is there salt? What makes Scottish single malt salty? And if you go onto the Laphroaig website, when you read through to their malting process, they say they get salt introduced to the process by opening a window on the barley, so allowing the North Atlantic sea air to come in and cool the barley down while they're doing the malting process. There's no salt in Scotch single malt whiskey. We don't know where the saltiness comes from, but that kind of salty aspect to it is often lost during the distillation phase as well. This one for me on the nose has these big classic kind of earthy, medicinal, smoky notes to it as well. But also it carries its age very well, because for me, I tend to struggle with things that are 15 plus, tend to be a bit too tired, a bit too heavy on the cask influence, whereas this is ex-bourbon. So this is really allowing the spirit to sort of show itself off.
Palate is really rich on this one, oily. Really like it.
It's got that nice kind of just sits in the palate for a bit of time as well. And also as well is Matt, I think I see smoking a cigar. This is a brilliant cigar malt as well. I'd say this goes really well with that nice kind of ashy spiciness of the tobacco as well. And whenever I kind of sort of describe whiskies, it's I use very careful terminology, because some brand ambassadors, I won't name who, I was at a tasting with one of them once, and they said, "Oh, this reminds me of chasing my grandmother's golden retriever through a field of hay while her apple pie bakes softly in the window." And I was sitting at the back of the tasting at the time, still relatively new to whiskey, thinking, what is this guy speaking about? I can't connect it. Whereas this one for me reminds me of a cigar I used to have when I was running my own cigar shop. Now, you all seem like lovely people, but you've never been to my cigar shop when I was running it. So you have that kind of connectivity issue. And for me, whiskey is a very personal style of dram. When I was first getting into whiskey, Laphroaig quarter cask was the first ever dram that I had. And my dad poured it while I was sitting with my dad and my granddad. And he poured me a double of Laphroaig over ice in a tumbler. And this kind of sort of dances very briefly with glassware as well, is that as far as I'm concerned, as long as the whiskey's not all over the floor, use whatever glassware you like. I've seen people use tiki cups, milk jugs, stainless steel cups. As long as you enjoy it, I'm good with it. But whenever I'm at home or in a bar drinking whiskey, if I ever order Laphroaig quarter cask, it will always be a double in a rocks over 2 cubes of ice, because that's how I was taught how to drink whiskey. So for me, it's a connective experience. And that's why this sort of chance to try all these Laphroaigs is very special to me as well, because I'm a huge fan of this style of whiskey as well. But this one has that kind of almost sort of funky, dunnagey smell to it as well. And I don't know if any of you have been hill walking in Scotland, but when I was small, my parents took me Munro bagging. So it was climbing all hills over 3,000 feet. And so they took me kind of climbing a couple of different Munros. And Scotland, I'm sure as you're aware, we like to have sort of all 5 seasons, sorry, in one day kind of thing. And there are peat bogs everywhere, and peat bogs have a smell. And I remember stepping in one when I was a kid, and when I got back, my shoe was absolutely reeking. And this has that kind of funky, peaty, earthy, dirty kind of style. And for me, I would describe this whiskey as being a very dirty whiskey. And it's quite funny when you hear people describing this in a kind of sort of dirty concept, and they look at you and go, it's a 20-year-old whiskey. How can a 20-year-old whiskey be dirty? But it has that kind of big funkiness, kind of almost a bit more liveliness to it as well. And it has that really nice kind of counterbalancing aspect to it. But also as well is that the barley for Laphroaig is malted at Port Ellen. So most of your whiskey distilleries, will buy their malted barley from the Port Ellen malting factories. But Laphroaig does still maintain active malting floors as well. So they malt a bit less than 10% of their barley at the distillery. And the problem is that it used to be every distillery malted their own barley, but the demand got too big. They couldn't malt enough barley to keep up with it. So you had this kind of almost sort of having to catch up with these things. And now Laphroaig, you can actually visit the malting floor at Laphroaig as well. And I don't know if you've ever seen a bottle of whiskey called Monkey Shoulder. Where the term monkey shoulder comes from is it's the action that the maltmen would do to turn the barley when they were germinating, was they would kind of go like that and they would look like monkeys. So this is where the term monkey shoulder comes from as well. But you have this kind of wonderful note of ashiness and funkiness coming through as well. And for me, I think this is a really classic example of an old whiskey that's not been overpowered by the cask. Whereas I've tried some fantastic older whiskies. Just off the top of my head, some older Macallans that have been put in full maturation sherries. That's just like drinking sherry. You're not getting any whiskey kick whatsoever. You're getting that full sherry kind of kick. Whereas this one here, you're still getting that earthy, peaty, robust kind of style coming through, even at 20 years old. And coming in at 50.4% ABV, it's still retained its alcoholic percentage quite well as well, in my opinion anyway.
This is phenomenal. This reminds me of the first whiskey that got me into Scotch that you served, which is a 29.201. This is very similar to that, not far off in terms of the casks, very similar actually, but just phenomenal. And I always think that, for me personally, I don't think, not anybody else, but I like to taste Laphroaig the best when after the finish, I take a deep breath and breathe just out my nose with my mouth open. And for me, that's the best way I can taste it. That's how I dictate how they taste differently. It really stands out. So it clings to all those little, nerves in your capillaries or whatever in your nose, and it just like hits different. And this is that expression, because you get funkiness, a little bit of smoke, but this sweetness that's just like very pleasant. Because sometimes Laphroaig can be, for me, like overpowering. It can take over my taste buds and all that, but this is just perfection to me.
I had somebody actually tell me once, it was a member that visited us, and they said they'd made old fashioned with one of the younger Laphroaigs, admittedly not a 20-year-old Laphroaig, but they'd made an old fashioned with one of our younger ones as well. and you get that kind of wonderful, interesting spirit coming through, because I think Laphroaig works really well as a single cask. And the only other single cask Laphroaig I've tried is the Dram Williamson bottling, but that was a teaspoon Laphroaig. So this is the SMWS Laphroaigs have been the only kind of actual pure single cask Laphroaigs that I've tried. And what I find really kind of fun about it as well is when you say Islay to people, they think, oh yeah, you know, big TCP Germany Laphroaigs, yeah, they'll kick your head off. This for me doesn't have that. I can sit sipping this and not feel like, you know, when I wake up the next day feeling like I've been licking an ashtray for 3 hours kind of thing. It has that really nice balance to it. And for me, when I'm trying whiskies, I draw a wee bit from food as well. And my partner, she's Greek, and we went over for Greek Easter, and I had this wonderful lamb that had been on the barbecue, and they'd put lemons on top of it as well. And this reminds me of that. It's got that nice kind of smoky, meaty barbecue note to it as well, but it's also got that nice kind of smoked citrus kind of style to it as well.
I think it's interesting to compare. The first dram we had was very interesting, but I don't think I would go back to it the same night. Whereas this one, I could have 3 or 4 in a night. It's just easy. It's not easy per se, but it's just, I could have multiple of them in a night.
Oh yeah.
You're a more restrained man than me, I'll tell you that much.
It's as rare as it, for us anyway, to drink like older whiskeys. You know, getting into that 18-year-old and older range, we really kind of get into, and we're members of Scotch Whiskey Society, but almost everything's like that 8 to 12-year-old. But boy, is it fantastic to drink something that is of, like, again, this kind of age. You get all that, you know, Laphroaig that I'm kind of, you know, used to, but Moyle, it's so delicate.
It's
big, that boldness, whatever, but incredibly delicate at the same time.
It tastes, I love it that it has the taste of the distillate and not of a barrel. You're not tasting just the barrel.
Yeah, you're getting the kind of the spirits being able to speak for itself, and this is why I particularly like the society, because we're quite prepared to use these really tired refill ex-bourbon casks because we have such faith in the distillates as well. And this one being one of our kind of probably LVMH holdovers, you have that kind of almost hidden gem aspect to it as well.
So I got, this was the last bottle I got. I think if I exclude yours, Matt, this was less than $300 at auction. I got this in January. So you can still find these things. And years ago, $300 for a Laphroaig 20, whatever it is, it was expensive. Now it's kind of a deal. So you can still find these. But this is just classic, not only Laphroaig, but classic SMWS Laphroaig. This is what I recall when the first time we met, but then we have a really good Laphroaig. This has all the makeup of that. It's like, what could you change here? What would you change? Nothing. I mean, it's perfect. Yeah,
I mean, to be honest, if you gave me another 20-year-old whiskey, say from a 20-year-old Glenmorangie that had all these specs, these kind of same like refill ex-bourbon tired cask, I would say just re-rack it, get the flavor there, do some wonderful things with it. Whereas Laphroaig, I think because the distillate has such a unique style that has been influenced by the peat, that has been influenced by the locality as well. But what I really like about it as well is a lot of these big distillates. So Islay has this kind of love-hate relationship with the whiskey distilling industry because, for example, Fesh originally started as a celebration of Islay culture. Nothing to do with the whiskey. The whiskey was just as a wee side note more than anything else. Now Fesh Ale has kind of turned on its head and gone all hyper whiskey. What was really interesting was I was chatting to a member who'd been on Islay fairly recently, and a lot of the distilleries still have the 2021, 22, and 23 Fesh exclusive bottlings because the market they're not getting are not buying the whiskey anymore. So what I find really interesting is that some distilleries like Ardbeg, that kind of stuff, I remember hearing stories of fights breaking out at Ardbeg because they couldn't get the Ardbeg Fesh released. Whereas Laphroaig has always had that tie to the Islay community as well. They employ exclusively people from Islay, Elias. Also as well, Bessie Williamson in 54, she opened up a distillery for the community. She would hold dances and celebrations, everything tied in with the distillery. And I think distilling on Islay is something that needs to be very carefully controlled and very carefully monitored, because at the moment, how the Islay distilleries are is that they have so many distilleries in Islay that maybe 10 years ago, they could all fire up at the same time. Now, if they all fired up at the same time, the whole island would black out because the grid can't cope. And this is what I find really interesting, is that Islay is now getting to a point where it has to be very carefully managed more than anything else. And they cut peat from Islay bogs for the Islay whiskies. And being an archaeologist, peat bogs get us very excited. And the Islay peat bogs are UNESCO World Heritage Sites. And the rate they're cutting, they are actually going to run out of peat, not soon, but in the near future. And it's going to be interesting to see how this kind of impacts, as well as the purported rumors of Port Ellen reopening as a distillery as well. So we are going to see some changes in the whiskey industry, I think, going forward.
Definitely. On that note, with Face Shield, Patrick, did you ever go back and get the Laphroaig single cask?
I actually did. The next morning or the morning after that, maybe when the distillery was open, they were selling that single cask. They had a commemorative bottle at Laphroaig for one of their longtime employees that was retiring.
It's interesting because when Alan was talking about Face Shield, it's been changing so much, and it was the first time that I ever went, and I met Patrick and I saw him there, and our friend Matt Lauren's been there, what, like 9-10 years in a row now?
Since 12, so a little bit longer than that.
11-12 years. And he and another friend called me and said, hey, Laphroaig. So I was there at the distillery and I had to go do some work, so I left. It's like I was like half an hour away. He called, like, they're releasing a single cask Laphroaig. So I like drove like a madman back and just like didn't even think about anything. I get there, I'm waiting in line. I was like, you know what? I better tell Patrick there's like a single cask. And so like, it's like, now we're all like running back and forth. Like, it's just nuts. It's a pandemonium. And so Alan, to your point, it's like it's changed a lot. And you're right. Like, it's all about like what's the future hold for Islay? And you hear a lot of the stories while you're there, but the demand significantly outweighs the supply, right? And then you have these little like buckets of magic that come out every once in a while, and you're like, I have to have it. And then we turn into like crazy people. It's kind of nuts. But that's the nature of it, right? That's the nature of drinking whiskey in all these different places.
Just to answer your question, Martin, peat. Peat is a bit of an interesting little beast. So we found peat all across Scotland. The SWA very clearly stipulates what can and cannot be used in Scotch single malt whiskey. We have to use Scottish peat. We cannot use anything else. So I think there could be a point where we have to realistically go either, because we export peat as well. So we export peat to Paul John and a few of the Scandies as well. So we export our peat worldwide. And I think there's going to be a point where either we are going to have to turn around to these guys that we have long-term relationships with and go, sorry, we can't send you peat anymore. Or I think it's going to be, we're going to have to try and work out a kind of deal with them as well. So I think peat is becoming a very charged topic in the whiskey industry, because the whiskey distilling industry itself, there's a big kind of push to go green, to be carbon neutral by 2025, I believe. And there's a distillery up in Cairn. Actually, I will say, people, please do feel free to pour the next dram, the 29.286. No, it's Laphroaig is one of my favorite distilleries. So if I don't keep the ball rolling, I will be here all night till the early hours.
We'll get you home. We'll get you.
I've got a bedtime.
This is the first of two. This is the first of two vaults, Alan. So help us understand that too, as everyone's pouring and.
Oh, of course. So just quickly finish off with about the peat thing. Is there's a distillery up in Speyside near the Cairn Gorms called Cairn, imaginatively enough, and they were experimenting with using artificial peat. So what they did was they chucked a block of peat through I don't know what you call them, but it basically broke the peat down to the chemical basis, and they generated that, and they artificially smoked the barley with that peat, and they ran a test batch. The Scots Whisky Association kind of caught that and went, no, and promptly lost their mind. And so I think, yes, a mass spectrometer, that's what they ran it through. And they broke it down and they created this artificial peat. And the Scotch Whisky Association said, no, you can't do this. But I think there's going to have to be a desire to do this because, for example, Eden Mill were the first guys to use chocolate malt in the whiskey distilling industry, but the Scotch Whisky Association said no. And then Glenmorangie went ahead and said, well, we've done this and we've got a nice big briefcase of money here. And this is where the Signet was born. So I think there is going to be a drive for change. So James was saying this is one of the first of the Vaults Collection series. Now, the Vaults Collection series, Laphroaig especially, is a very special thing for me because, like James was saying, it's one of the first bottles that I sold him as well. The Vaults Collection is our ultra premium range of bottlings. So these are ones that you can usually see by a little tag, a wee golden tag that sits on them as well. And for me, some of the Vaults collections are a bit too heavy cask influenced, whereas this one here is phenomenal, really interesting. And it's an ex-bourbon into our first fill shaved, toasted, recharred ex-Oroloso barrique. This is where we get the term STR from. What STRs do is that shave toast recharring basically opens it up, really reinvigorates the cask as well. Typically the STRs, again, we're about 1 year to 2 year finishing as well. And this is kind of a classic Isla SMWS tasting note here. Maggie liquid, I've never heard that. I've never had that before. And also as well, anthracite embers. Anthracite embers. What I always say is that when you are drinking this, when you are trying society whiskey, tasting notes always with a piece of salt more than anything else. Don't take them as nutritional as there we go.
Someone's
it's got an umami based flavor to it as well.
Yeah, exactly. Someone had this.
I mean, it says it improves the taste.
We've had these are like seasoning salts here. They're kind of like soy sauce, but not made out of soy. Sometimes made out of soy, but it's like a heavy, salty, yeah.
You know, these sauces, they have different flavors for different regions. Like India has a different flavor, and I think the UK has a different flavor, as opposed to America. Yes,
definitely. Because we have like the gravy starter here in the square kind of bottle, and then we also have like yeah.
But this for me has really interesting nose to it, actually. So if you do ever visit Bath Street, you do ever come and see us, one of the first things I will tell you is that I am not sherry's biggest fan. There's a few sherry casks I like. There's a few sherry casks I don't like. The don't like outweighs the like. But for me, Islay sherries are always fantastic because they have that big, rich, decadent aroma to it as well. The first fill Oroloso for me doesn't, on the nose, kind of cover a lot of the Laphroaig kind of key spirits as well. And that's often my fear, is that when we see first fill Oroloso or first fill sherry as a re-racking, I'm often quite worried that kills the kind of base spirit in between. But for me, still, it's got that kind of almost little bit of peatiness to it, a little bit of fireness to it as well. The sherry, it's almost like when I was ill as a child, I was given hot toddies, and it actually reminds me of a hot toddy. Hot water, lemon, double whiskey, a bit of cinnamon as well, because it was typically peated whiskey that was given to me when I was ill. And it's got that almost sort of slight viscous heaviness to it as well, that I think makes it quite an interesting kind of sort of style of dram as well. And just if you're interested with and I think this really comes through with this dram especially, is the peatiness, the peat smoking of the barley is, to sort of use a sort of American barbecue terminology, if you will, is a kind of low and slow kind of style, where they kind of really roast the barley, really kind of low temperatures, almost cold smoke it. And you get this really interesting development of flavors to it as well. And you have this kind of almost development of sort of pepper and spice. But I do definitely agree with you. Water does calm it down. Water really does take the teeth out of it. And you get that almost dark, dirty, peaty earthiness to it as well. And you get that more kind of funkier style of whiskey coming through as well. And this here is really interesting for me because we're coming in at 23 years old as well. So it's got a bit of age behind it, but it's still with that spiciness. It's 55.3% ABV. So it's still got a lot of kind of fire to it as well. But for me, it's
dry. Very dry. like puckering a lot afterwards. Really nice. It's just so different. It's so different than all the other ones we've had.
What's quite interesting is this is another one of the Laphroaigs I didn't get a chance to try because we only got one bottle delivered to the venue, and a customer picked up the bottle before we had a chance to get it open for the bar.
I believe there was a. Does anybody know here? I think a US released an SDR cask as well. Does anybody know? I thought for sure they did this year. Maybe, maybe not. I think it was another vault, but for the US. I'm almost positive. I think we compared it early on when it first came out. Yeah, Griffin has one. Yep.
So there is the US market is quite interesting because sometimes you will see the same distillery code, but two different names of bottles as well. And this kind of sort of strikes back to the advertising laws that you have in the States as well. Because if something, it's the reason why we also changed the monogram as well. I don't know if I've got, so the old monogram, I don't have any of the old monograms, but I don't know if you can see, but that is the kind of new monogram where it's got no words in it whatsoever. And that's because the American government weren't happy with us selling bottles of cognac and rum and rye with the word Scotch malt whiskey written on them either as well. So that's why we had to change the moniker over. But also as well with names, we have to be very careful. And it's got these kind of interesting flavors coming through. And this one here especially, for me, I think has that wonderful, rich, kind of heavy peatiness to it as well. But it also reminds me of walking the moors, you know, smelling that kind of loamy underground. And if you've ever walked in the Highlands or Islay or the islands, and you've walked across a moor, a bog, the smells that are released when you are walking the bogs, you kind of get that kind of coming through on the palate quite heavily as well. I don't know if people want to start looking at the 29.278.
Yeah, definitely start pouring that. Anyone else have any thoughts on this? This is just so different. It's like
Therapy.
Therapy?
Syrupy.
Oh, syrupy.
Well, Scotch whiskey is therapy as well.
Can be.
It just has so much herbal elements to it. That's the thing that's surprising because you know, STR. We drink. Everyone drinks a lot of STR with like Kavalan and you know, a lot of other newer distillers when they have young make. It's, you know, they like to put STR cask. Adds so much complexity to it. You can actually, it's drinkable.
Yeah.
But this one.
What's STR?
Shaved, toasted.
So Alan was talking about, yeah, shaved, toasted, and recharred. They'll take a barrel and they'll rejuvenate it essentially and take the insides. Correct me if I'm wrong, Alan, but shave it. They'll re-toast it, rechar to a certain level that allows it to bring new sugars and flavors outside of the wood that may be muted with a barrel that's been kind of used too many times.
So the best way to kind of think about these kind of recharred hogsheads, shaved, toasted, recharred hogsheads is to first of all kind of realize the Scotch whisky industry. We like to use a lot of terms to describe very similar things. We like to make it needlessly complicated. We call it a sobriety test in the whiskey industry. So the ambassadors actually can seem sober when we know what we're talking about. But when we're thinking about casks, when we see recharred hogsheads, STR hogsheads, is casks are a lot like human beings. The more times we use them, the more tired they get. And what we occasionally need to do is you need to go on a holiday. So the shave toast rechar aspect is kind of almost like putting the cask on a wee holiday. We're getting them rejuvenated, re-excited again, and we're kind of opening up some more of the liquid coming through as well. And you're getting more of the vanillins, the lignans, the tannins, the gallic acids, the chemicals kind of coming into the new make as well. Because when we're dealing with Scotch whiskey, your primary flavor compound is your casks. The new makes do impart some degree of flavor, but your casks are your primary influencers. And this is what I find really interesting is if you go to Islay, for example, go to the Bowmore warehouse number 3 tasting, they will tell you their casks sit in warehouse number 3 and are lovingly kissed by the salty sea spray coming in through the open windows. We don't know why, but that doesn't have any effect. But also as well, as a society, what we do is that when we purchase the cask, we take the cask out of that environment. So all these casks here have spent a bit of time on Islay at the Laphroaig distillery, but they've also spent the majority of their life in an area near Glasgow city centre called Hillington. And
But to be fair, had they even spent their life at Laphroaig, you might have bought them from the mainland, because that's where most of the Laphroaig is sitting anyway.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, again, it's the same with Talisker as well. If you ever read a Talisker bottling, they will tell you that it's been matured and distilled on Skye. It's been probably matured for about 3 years and a day on Skye and then shipped off the mainland. And it's the same with a lot of these distillers. And I don't begrudge them for it. But when we purchase the casks, we take ownership of that cask. So we actually take that to our dunnage warehouse and we mature it ourselves. And this is what I find really quite interesting as well, because you get that different flavors and styles. So this here's a 26-year-old second fill ex-bourbon cask coming in at 57% ABV. So we're playing a little more higher ABVs now for me, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, we've gone up every time. I cracked the code.
You've gone. It's a super secret. You figured it out.
Do I win a prize? I figured it out.
This is so this one did come from the US. It did come from SMWS officially, no auction or anything. And this is it was another vault. And this, Alan's a little bit different than the UK. The UK is kind of going through their RRP stuff and where they're pricing. But this is one of those that had made a big leap. And we had seen this happening with 29's. They keep jumping and they continue to jump actually, which is kind of crazy. I think they've kind of solidified lately. I think the last one was kind of like very steady here.
Yeah.
But this was one that kind of jumped out. It was a 26-year-old, old and dignified. So old and dignified is another one of those profiles that is really, really good stuff. And so I snatched this up, and I think this one did sell out eventually, maybe in a day or two. I don't remember. But
It's funny. It used to be $10 a year, and then it might go up a little bit above a certain age. But I think it was like 6 years ago, that the brand decided to, rather than charge by the age of the whiskey, they added in a component for the distillery number. I think originally when it started, it was supposed to be they were more of a mystery. And so they just priced everyone the same. But I've seen recently, it seems like the distilleries in demand seem to command a higher price, not just for scarcity.
Well, there is actually also, to go completely off topic and not talk about 29 for a second, there is sort of a bit of a restructuring going on at SMWS because, I mean, I'm sure as you guys are aware, like I've said, we're no longer part of the LVMH family. And when we were part of the LVMH family, we were run in America by a separate mercantile entity known as the Shang family.
Yep.
They looked after all of our interests there. And what I find really interesting now is that because we're no longer part of the Glenmorangie family, we're no longer part of that entity either. So we are kind of rebuilding our US arm of the company as we speak.
Didn't he sell that separately though? I thought there was
I wouldn't know. That would be above my pay grade.
Sorry, yeah, because I remember that he was getting out before the sale went through. So,
yeah. But also as well is, so this is what I find really interesting. This 29 here is a prime example because I've never seen this 29 come through UK doors. And that is because of the fact that there was a parcel of casks that were set aside for the US market. And this was considered to be part of our kind of divorce deal with LVMH, if you will. And this is what I really like about the society is that we have these different things coming through now. Yes, there will be an increase in bottles, taxation. It's just how the world works. We can't do anything about it. But for me, what I really like about this here now as well is we're getting casks now that are coming up left, right, and center that we didn't see for a long time. And we're getting more bourbons, more ryes coming through, but also more Islay whiskies coming through as well. And we had a membership AGM maybe about, must be about 4 years ago now. Yeah, about 4 years ago. And we asked everybody, what do you want to see more of? And the resounding response was sherry and peat. That's it. We want to see more sherry, more peat coming through. And just to sort of just touch very quickly, Jeff, we've got lots of old grains at Bath Street. You will not be disappointed, I can guarantee you that much. But we are seeing more of this kind of stock coming through as well. And what I really hope is that guys like Laphroaig are big when they kind of calm down this initial rush, because the Far East market is opening up left, right, and center. That's draining a lot of casks from the independent market. And there's new distilleries opening up left, right, and center, and we're having all these different things. And I think Laphroaig are very good at what they do, which is kind of consistently traditional Islay whiskey. It doesn't help that they also carry the royal warrant of our new king, of course. but that does help kind of sort of promote sort of fascination with it as well. But this one here for me has that kind of old school classic steamboat style whiskey to it. And what I mean by that is it's on during the Industrial Revolution, there were steamboat puffer ships that went up and down the Clyde, and they were kind of big, clanky, oily, peaty, smoky, just big, messy, horrible, loud things. And it almost has that kind of attitude towards it as well. And so for me, that's what I really like about it, is that it's got that big, old school, traditional Islay whiskey feel to it.
Very old school. This one's very, you can nose the age. Like, it's got some other elements to it. The fruits are there. It's very balanced. The alcohol's not spiky on the nose.
What's interesting as well, I think, is, I mean, part of Laphroaig's kind of peat from the Macri Moor peat bogs is that you can almost sense the heather coming through as well. You can sense that kind of sort of decaying heather coming through. But if just on a random side note as well, sphagnum moss, which is one of the key parts of any peat bog, was used in World War II as dressings because it was considered to be a sterile, spongy material that would be used as any dressings in wars. So, and this practice was brought by the guys who were serving at these Islay whiskies, because Laphroaig was closed during World War II. And the guys that were kind of working at the distillery who went over to fight, they knew the sphagnum moss was good for packing wounds. So they would just rip up the sphagnum moss and just pack the wounds with it as well.
What I find funny about Laphroaig also is, depending on the age, you get more of the smoky influences versus the smoky, fruity influences, but it's not linear. I mean, like with Bowmore, it's linear. When a Bowmore hits 30, you know you're going to get grapefruit. But with Laphroaig, it seems like it has different peaks. It peaks at 10 and less. I think it peaks again in the 20 to 25 range. And then 30 was just spectacular, the 30 that they did the initial one. But then after 30, it's a totally different whiskey, and you don't even know that it's Laphroaig.
I mean, for me, I think sort of Laphroaig, out of all the Islay whiskies that I've tried, is the most schizophrenic thing that's ever come to the society. It can't make up its mind about what it's doing. The young Laphroaigs that we get, the 9, the 10-year-old, the ex-bourbon casks, have that big kind of just run screaming at the glass a million miles a minute. But at the same time, the older Laphroaigs that we've done, the 26s, the 30-year-olds, that kind of stuff, I remember the salted caramel and toffee apples that we did with the Sherry 29 tasting that James got me in on for the first time. It had that similar kind of style to it, that similar big body flavor. And it's one of the reasons why I'm always a big fan of Laphroaig, is that you have this wonderful kind of cross section of styles, of spirits, of distillates coming through as well. And you really have that almost, it's a kind of dram for every person from that perspective from the society, is that, you know, we do Laphroaigs that have all these different notes and these different flavors to it as well.
Yeah, but it's just funny that it loses the peat influence and then it gets it back, and then it loses it again. Like, it gets it back at 2021. It just, it seems like there's
also,
more peat.
That's also to do with the changing of management as well, because sometimes when distillery managers change, they'll change the recipes, they'll change the key builds for their key malts as well. And I think what's really nice and interesting about that is you have this almost toing and froing between the styles. I mean, Laphroaig being owned by Beam Suntory at the moment, but it's passed through all these different ownerships. So you have all these different casks from all these different periods of distillery managers, company owners for that as well. And you have that wonderful kind of cross section of almost, you can, for me, each dram of Laphroaig, you can taste the history in each glass. Like if you have a 21 versus a 25, a 30 versus a 10, even the Cardrias versus the quarter cask, even our single cask versus proprietary single cask, you have all these really different levels of flavor to it as well. And this one here especially, I can't remember where I was reading it, but it reminds me of a story I was told where this was the kind of, this dram here, the 29, sorry, keep track of where we are again, 29278. You have that kind of almost prohibition breaking style of whiskey as well, where it was that kind of sweeter peat that would be hidden by the cocktails like old fashions, whiskey sours, because this stuff was ported over in a way to hide it, in a way to kind of alter the flavors and change the kind of flavors descriptors as well. So for me, I think it's got this really interesting, because the casks like this Laphroaig would be rolled off the ships, and the prohibition agents opening up the casks would go, who in the right mind would want to drink this? then they'd be shunted onto all the gangsters as well, and the gangsters would run it all across America to these prohibition bars. And it's this kind of sweeter peat style that worked well with these old fashions, the whiskey sours, the Rob Roys, that kind of stuff as well. So you had that really interesting level of flavor, I think.
We got a question from Martin, actually.
Yeah. So maybe this is, I don't know if we should take it offline or not, but has the society ever thought about creating kind of a tasting kit like we have today? Because we've had 4 drams and they've been very different, all 4 of them. For maybe new members of the society where you can buy, say, 10 samples, and then the result of how you rank them would then help you with the flavor profiles as to what you like and what you don't like. Is that something you've given thought to, or?
So we have given thought to that. The problem is that because the society is an international branch, different flavor profiles are kind of for different countries more than anything else as well. So Americans will have different flavors to Europeans. Europeans will have different flavors to everyone else. And I think we did sell taster packs, like the festival taster pack and stuff like that. But I know certainly we have, in the UK, we have invited members along to be part of our tasting panel as well. So we did, I don't know if you remember the Exotic Cargo Batch 1, our first ever heresy bottling. We had members involved in the tasting panel for that as well. We did members tastings with insects as well. And we did members tastings with Experimental Batch 1 before it was commercially released as well. So it is something where we are trying to pull aside the mysticism from the society.
In the US, we've had the tasting panels as well. The issue with the tasting kits is they can't legally sell them here. That was the issue. The issue was there were issues with the size of it and how you can do that. That was it. I mean, obviously in COVID, people was skirting that issue for a while.
Yeah. But
I heard that it was tough. And then the other thing is I heard the American team didn't want to sit and pour. That was part of it as well. But in Scotland, they were less concerned with that. But I've heard both reasons for there's no American tasting kits, because I've bought the SMWS Advent calendar, and I'm surprised that they've never done one here. I've been pitching that since Alan owned the company back in 2010, and they had no interest in doing it then. And then,
I think the laws have recently changed. You saw Four Roses in the United States just recently came out with a big tasting kit.
They were big.
50 ml bottles for them, because I think when the laws changed, when they introduced 700 ml bottles in the US markets, I think they also introduced some lower sized bottles. And so that's allowing, I think we will see tasting kits from different distilleries in the future.
Yeah, but that's 50 mLs is 2 ounces. The kits that they do are like half ounces, I believe, or 1 ounce.
So, ml.
By the way, if it ever comes up, that doesn't happen with Piermonts. Just so you're paying for the experience, the drams are free. So there you go. Thanks for bringing that up, Matt.
Well, a company is different than an individual as well. A company has different laws they have to follow, as opposed to a group.
I just always quite like it whenever James very kindly sends me the samples over as well. And I always quite like it because the postman always drops off this kind of large box, kind of wrapped in varying materials with varying kind of customs decoration. No, but it's always quite fun. But I think for me, one of the reasons why I think we've never really looked at doing tasting kits in the US is that we're still rebuilding the US arm of the company. And I remember when I first started, we had a partner bar in Florida, and I think we had a partner bar in Tennessee, both of which we've lost due to us leaving the LVMH connections. So we are sort of rebuilding that kind of almost arm of the company. We are rebuilding that sector as well. And I think there is a drive. And for me, what's always quite important, one of the reasons why I jumped initially when James voiced this tasting to come on it, is a lot of you guys who are members, you kind of see the society as this faceless entity or this kind of just organization that's based out of the UK that occasionally sends you great whiskies. And you can go to a society venue and go, I don't really know who I'm speaking to. Whereas for me, especially, just sorry to pick on you again, to use you as an example, is that, if you come to the Bath Street venue, you can you recognize a face. It makes it a bit more homely more than anything else. And that's why I always really enjoy doing this kind of stuff, because it creates that connection between members, because the society is not solely just based in the UK. We're based all over the place. And I think for me, that's much more important more than anything else.
Alan, I just went to Queen Street. It's not the same without you. It's a different feeling. It's so nice now. Everyone's so calm. No, I'm joking.
Yes, no, Queen
That's
Street when I was there was all a bit manic and running about in circles trying to chase everybody down and making sure everybody did their appropriate things.
It's a great time. If anyone's never been, Queen Street is a great townhouse. It's old, but it's very unique, very nice. And then Bath Street is like blow your mind. It's like new, designed very well. I think you have even like a pool table there now, and like always new things are happening.
We don't have it anymore, it's gone.
Oh,
So it's so we had the pool table for the month because our manager likes to do a tasting, and I would say the Queen Street venue is good. It's when I was there, the members room was up on the third floor, not the first floor that it's on at the moment, and I think it is very interesting, unique, and for me, each venue has its own feels. What I will say is that if anybody is thinking about visiting the vaults anytime soon, just be careful because the vaults is going through a renovation phase at the moment. So it's not the similar entity that everybody knows and loves at the moment anyway. But I think each venue serves its own purpose. I've not been down to London in a long time. It's been a long time since I've been to London members room, but I know that's certainly next on the cards to getting renovated as well. But this one here, the 29 point, track things.
well, we're moving to 279, I believe, is the next one. One last thing before we move off that, there on the 278, one of our fellow friends here, Griffin Wright, has like almost a full bottle of this. If anybody wants more of that, you can ping him and you can work it out and buy it off of him or whatever. But I think he's trying to, downsize on certain bottles. So I just wanted to mention that as a public service announcement.
And maybe since the last one was 278 and this is 279, is there like sister casks and were they similar in time?
So there was definitely, so the society has always had an interesting kind of almost strategy when it comes towards releasing whiskies as well. So 278 and 279, these are just the casks that we purchased. So these are brother and sister casks. So these are two casks purchased one after another, but they weren't purchased on the same day, the same month, the same week. They were purchased at different times. So you might get some different flavors coming through as well. And that's what I really like about this one, is that you have that kind of almost change in flavor as well.
Very different dates on these. Just to clarify, 278 was distilled in April 1995. The 279 was distilled in February 2001. So it has nothing, like they're not related at all. Like to Alan's point, like they were probably bought in the same parcel and they numbered them when they bottled them that way. But like these aren't related at all. They're next to each other. But good point.
Thank you.
A lot of times they are.
Yeah, and I guess I'd also tell because the last one was 26 years old and this is 19. So
are they bottled when they're inventoried, or are they bottled when they're bottled? I thought they kept the cask number at the warehouse, but then when you actually decide to make it a bottling, it just gets the next available number, because that's why they come out in numbered order.
So the casks are released sequentially, and the casks are given a cask number. So these both, the 278 and 279, will have been given. So the 278 will have been purchased as a cask, and then left and left and left. And then this one will have been purchased as probably given the date as a new make. So this would have probably been a fresh fill. This would have been a cask that we gave to the distillery to fill as well. So we have relationships with certain distilleries, and we have certain kind of contingencies in place where we can give a cask to a distiller and they'll fill it straight away, kind of thing. And this being the next sequential cask, this was the 279th cask that we purchased from the Laphroaig distillery as well. And for me,
they came out in order. That's why I thought the numbers came once they come out, not when they're bought. Because sometimes you keep a bottle a lot longer, and I've never seen like a bottle 20 bottles earlier come out at a time. They usually come out sequentially. So since some of them age for different ages in the warehouses, that's why I assumed that that's what I was always told, was the number was when it was bottled, not when it was acquired. But I might be wrong, but that's why they always come out in numbered order.
Need to do some research into that, because as far as I was aware, it was just cask allocation, but it might be bottling. I'll do some research and get back to you on that one for you.
Back to the beginning of the conversation, there's no consistency whatsoever. Like it's all over the place. There's missing numbers.
General thumb of the society, no consistency with cask numbers.
The last one, remember we did Brooklady last time, and Brooklady's not peated, and there's all these 23 Brookladys that are all peated. We're like, what the heck is going on here? So it's like, if you want consistency, this is not the right distiller, this is the right bottler.
But also as well is this one here for me is really interesting. This is a ex Oloroso butt refill. And again, if you look at the color, this just does not look like an Oloroso butt refill. So this probably was a very tired cask that we've got. And my tentative sort of suggestion would probably be, this is Oloroso butt that we've had sitting in our warehouse that we've given to the Laphroaig distillery, and they've filled with a certain age more than anything else.
This bottle is also secured through another friend of ours, Matt Ryan, who's he has a set, but he couldn't make it today. He had a death in the family. He's the Lagavulin guy on Facebook. That's why I was explaining. He's the Lagavulin guy on Facebook, but he helped me secure this bottle for this. And it was nice that it's sherry, but like you said, Alan, it doesn't look like it. Doesn't taste overly like sherry either. At least the first palate.
For me, it's like very big kind of ashy notes to it almost. That's strange. So also as well, the butts being the larger casks, that will alter the surface area and the contact for wood as well. So you will get a change in development of flavor profiles as well. And this here has that wonderfully kind of almost ashiness, almost kind of, so the funk is kind of will come from, sometimes it'll come from cask maturation, but it'll also be quite common in Oloroso casks as well. This can sometimes lead to the formation of what we call butyric acid in whiskey. So if you ever get the note of butyric acid in whiskey, just put it down and walk away. It's not a pleasant smell in the slightest. But this funk can develop from sherry casks and wine casks primarily as well. It's less common in bourbon casks, but this funk can be that richer, heavier, almost heatier sweetness to it. And the way I kind of describe the funk best is when I was working in archaeology, I used to deal with old leather books. And if you ever open an old leather book, you get that kind of old leather armchair, almost mulchiness coming out of the book as well. And this here has that, which is where we can get from these kind of richer, sherrier style malts. But weirdly enough, actually touching back on flavor notes and different countries having different palates, Martin made a note about the big red chewing gum, like spicy cinnamon. I actually did a field season in Alaska, so I was able to try some big red chewing gum along with a couple other things. And for me, that makes a connection. I can get that kind of spicier bit of heat to it as well. And this comes from the European oak system as well coming through, because European oak does give your wood a bit more spice, a bit more oomph, and a bit more kind of almost like lactic acid, gallic acid as well. Whereas American white oak has the higher concentration of vanillins, sort of these isoamine acetates, these kind of sort of more sweeter, candier notes to it as well.
Is this an unusual color for Oloroso?
So, be careful what I say here. Yes and no. So what it is that sometimes refill Oloroso casks can still have that signature heavy sherry color from the society, and sometimes first fill Oloroso casks can still have this color as well. For the society, we are very dependent on the cask influence. The cask indicates the kind of style of spirit that's coming through. Whereas if you buy some distilleries, some whiskies from certain distilleries in Scotland, you can get caramel food coloring added to their malt as well. So everybody associates Oloroso casks with almost that kind of deep, rich, dark color to it as well. Whereas this one here, having that kind of light straw, that light kind of sort of, you know, straw goldy color, I would say probably would speak to me as being a 5th or 6th fill Oloroso cask. So this is where you're getting that slight hint of sweetness on the palate, but that's it. So there's not a lot of cask influence coming through. The wood is very tired. The wood is very kind of almost at a point. And I think for me, I would say this would have been either bottled as is at this age, or if we'd aged it any further, we probably would have re-racked it into a different finish just to give it that wee bit extra level of flavor as well. So for me, I think this one is, just to agree with David as well, it's got that ashy smokiness to it. It's got that big old brassy flavor, and we are creeping up the alcoholic spectrum as well. So we are getting a bit more feistier and a bit more punchier at I think 57.3% ABV. So you are getting that bigger alcoholic kind of style coming through as well.
And going back to the color though, isn't the color usually due to the type of wood? If this was a sherry cask that was American wood, it's going to be lighter to begin with. So if it was a refill American oak sherry cask, that's why we're getting a lot of vanillas, and that's why we're not getting much color, especially if it's a refill, because then the sherry influence was probably sucked out even more so because there's no Spanish oak left.
Well, this would be my assumption, is that the color is coming from your American oak influence, because a lot of the sherry producers these days are no longer using European oak because oak is a running out commodity. They are pushing more towards the American oak style market. So I would say tentatively, just to agree with you, Matt, is that it's not a European oak, because a European oak, you would expect a darker color straight off the bat. But this also feeds into what the society is going to be doing soon as well, is if you purchase a bottle of whiskey from us, we aim to, this is very much in development at the moment, but we very much would like to be able to say, right, you purchased a bottle of this whiskey from us, it's in this cask, and this cask comes from this bourbon distillery, this sherry distillery, this port distillery, this rum distillery, and it's to kind of provide a bit more kind of sort of, transparency for that. But I would agree with you on the American oak influence coming through, that slight heavy vanilla note to it as well. I would say maybe potentially there might be a bit of sweetness to it from the sherry there as well. But I think this might be from the first kind of real kind of true crop of sherries that were matured using American white oak, because it's only until very recently that the American white oak has been saturating the European sherry market. So we'll see what happens, because this whole kind of saturation of American white oak into the sherry market was primarily because the European wood was running out. And European oak has to be used in, oak has to be used in Scotch whisky maturation. It can be American, European, Japanese, whatever. It has to be oak, however. And so before Ukraine happened, that a lot of the Scotch whisky producers, a lot of the sherry producers, a lot of the wine producers were looking at the forests in Siberia as an alternative to your traditional Germanic, French, and Spanish European oak forests. The problem was everything happened there, and wood's getting a bit more complicated to source from there, shall we say. And the American sort of white oak forests have been more carefully curated, because Scotch whisky distilleries, since the time of Prohibition, have gone, well, the bourbon distilleries can only use their casks once, and they've got to get rid of them. So they have a lot better wood management, whereas the European forests have been heavily used since the Industrial Revolution. So I think for me, we're going to see more American white oak coming through into the whiskey industry. So I think eventually it's going to get to a point where either guys like Macallan and Dalmore are going to have to start using caramel food coloring, or we are going to see a change in the color of these traditionally very dark and very heavy spirits as well.
We're making incredible time, Alan. We never have enough time. We're always running out. Last time we had like 5 minutes or 10 minutes for the last one. So usually I spread some of my comedy, but I won't bore you all with that. Definitely anybody that has any thoughts on this dram, please do share. This one is, I like what David said. It's very Laphroaig-y. And then at the same time, any last thoughts on this one, but then any other questions or clarifications so far that anybody has on anything that we've talked about? We've covered a lot, and this is not an easy tasting for anybody here that hasn't drank a lot of SMWS. SMWS is weird, right? It's this weird cult club. It's easy. Well, they accept anybody, so it's not like a pass. But there's rules and there's traditions and all that. And so certainly, if there's anything that we talked about that doesn't make sense, anybody, please, this is a great time to clarify. And then those that are ready, by all means, we can start to pour the last one. But this is I like the pace for myself because I can compare each one very closely because we're very tightly aligned. Versus like if we go off in a tangent and it's 20 minutes between pours, I can't compare, right? So, but I'll stop talking. But this is a good time. If there's any clarifications, questions, everyone needs to use a restroom before we move on to the last. It's not a cult, Jeff, but like I don't know. I've met a lot of interesting people in the Scotch Whisky Society, but no, it's a great society. If anyone's looking to join, there's really great aspects of it, a great community as well, and great folks like Alan and others around the world, in Japan, in Germany, Australia, many great ambassadors, many great bars around the world too.
What I will say, Jeff, just to touch on very briefly, is that I am thinking of getting on the tasting panel just so I can put a whiskey name as "Do Not Drink the Kool-Aid," but we'll get there in the end. Also, as well, for the Fight Club, I can neither confirm nor deny it's Fight Club, as that's breaching the first and second rule as well. But for me, what I really like about the Laphroaig especially is Laphroaig is one of these distilleries that everybody knows about, and the society, there's members young and old that all kind of fantasize and get really into the number 29. What I always recommend is, if you ever get a chance to try distillery 137. 137 is English whiskey. This is the point where I get the flaming torches thrown at me and get called a heretic. But 137 is English chapter. An English chapter was set by the head distillery for Laphroaig, the ex-head distiller, sorry, for Laphroaig. And it's essentially Laphroaig that's distilled down in England. And they use the same barley, same casks, same still setup, same everything. So I would definitely recommend the New World whiskey we do at the Society is truly phenomenal. You get some really interesting flavors and punchiness coming through as well. What I always say to people is that when you are trying a 131, I've not seen that in a long time. It's a 137 is the English whiskey.
My bad. Thank you.
131. Oh, it's been a while since I've seen one of those, I'll tell you that much. But what I always say is that when we are thinking about trying these New World distilleries, I would say definitely approach them with the aspect that we Scots have been distilling for 400 years before everyone else even came onto the market. And I mean, the best example is the first example of distilling on Islay is 1745. And that was when the monks brought over the distillation equipment and they started setting up the distilleries. Laphroaig itself was established in 1815. And the establishment dates are always very sketchy for Scotch whisky distilleries because we have the 1823 Customs and Excise Act. And this was the legalization of Scotch whisky distilling in the UK. And there was always a myth I was told when I was a kid, which is when we were up walking the hills, is that if you ever see a ball of fire in the hills, do not go towards that ball of fire, because that is the realm of the fairy folk. Sorry, I had to knock on a piece of wood there. And what it is that if you fell into the fire, you would drink and party with them all night long and you would disappear. In reality, where this comes from is the tacksmen. They would come up from the south and they would visit the islands, they would visit the highlands, they would visit Speyside and Lowland and look for these little balls of flame. And these were all the illicit distillers that were running at the time in Scotland. And it was often considered to be, the tacksman would rock up at this illicit distiller and go, well, actually, you owe me money. And, you can't do the distiller at the dead of night. He will make you disappear, as they say. And this is where the myth of that comes from. So this is what I always like about it. And if you ever go to Islay and hear to someone referring themselves as a peat reeker was an illicit distiller back in the day. Supposedly, they are all gone. They no longer exist in Scotland. I would probably beg to differ that, to be honest. We probably would have someone somewhere. And if you ever get a chance to try a whiskey distillery called Abenjerig, and Abenjerig is a really interesting whiskey, and it's from the Isle of Lewis. And if you ever get a chance to try it, every Scotch whiskey distillery uses copper pot stills. These guys use witches' hat stills. These are Prohibition era stills. It is the most interesting and diversive malt that I've ever had as well. What I will do as well is, just if anyone is interested, I've just popped in the chat, the Blethering Bartender Outlook, that's my email. Any questions, any queries, if you think before the tasting ends, I wish I'd asked them that. Even if it's through with society, non-society, just whiskey in general, chuck me an email. I'll try and see if I can get back to you with an accurate answer. And I do have an Instagram page thingy, and that's just my handle there. So just, again, if you have any questions, queries, contact me in either of those two mechanisms. I can try and see what I can work out for you as well. But enough about blethering. Let's get on to the final dram for the whiskey.
Sounds good. I am just amazed. We have never flown this fast before, so.
Yeah, we flew through the first couple. I was surprised.
There you go.
Hey, Tomo.
Tomo's a bartender at one of the famous whiskey bars in New York City, Copper and Oak, as well as Brandy Library. 213. 213.
The second dram we had.
Oh, Deep, Dark, and Desirable. And something that Alan just said about Peat Reek, the third one, the STR cast, was Chateau du Peat Reek, which is, when you think about it, it's actually a very clever name when you think about it, considering they're doing STR to Laphroaig. It's very interesting.
Well, this one for me has that nose of that ashy, kind of almost dirty, just nice, interesting, sort of proper medicinal kind of style flavor to it as well.
So this one, this might have come out in the UK as well, but it's there. Go ahead.
This one came out in the UK, and I actually remember when this came out, and it sold out in about a day, I think, if I remember correctly. 59.1% ABV as well, so it's got that bit more sort of punchier, feistiness to it as well.
And was someone else trying to jump in? I don't want to cut anybody off, or maybe that was you, Alan. Okay. The nose on all of these have been very different, but very unique. All very pleasant. Very pleasant.
Well, again, I think it's coming back to Matt's comment about the Laphroaigs developing different levels of peat at different ages. I think one of the reasons why I think the Society 29's are so interesting is these casks have been purchased at different states on different stages, during the Laphroaig's distillation cycles. So this one here, for example, is an 18-year-old that was distilled in 1998, so pre-millennial. And this would have been before, I think it's Barry McAllister, he's just left now. So again, each head distiller will put a little bit of a twist on what their kind of base recipe is as well. And for me, I think this is what I really like about it, because this is just a big old classic refill ex-bourbon cask as well. 18 years old, has that, what I really love about the Society Laphroaig's, that ashy. I don't know if Barry's left or not. I heard someone from Laphroaig was stepping back, but it might not have been Barry.
Barry's still there as of right now. Matt would know better,
Okay.
but I think
No,
Barry's
leaving Laphroaig now. I mean, John was the big leap a couple of years ago.
We just did a Zoom with Barry, Matt, like what?
Yeah.
2 weeks
2
ago?
weeks ago. Yep.
Yeah.
Oh,
He's
then
not
he's
going
still there. Then he is definitely still there. But this has that kind of old school, proper, big old brassy notes to it as well. And it has that kind of really wonderful, almost, it reminds me of why I got into whiskey, that kind of smoky, medicinal, bit of peatiness aspect coming through to it as well. And you have that really almost very interesting level of flavor to it as well. And this here is what I would term as kind of a classic SMWS Isla whiskey. Something nice, something peated, but also as well, one of the reasons why I would say the flavor profiles always take them with a pinch of salt, because the flavor profile for this one is heavily peated. And if you try a heavily peated distillery number 66 or 137 or even number 10, you get a different flavor coming through as well.
There's a saltiness, salinity that's there that very reminiscent of all Laphroaig. I didn't get that as much through a lot of the other ones, but this one definitely has that. This one definitely is that classic salinity of the fish. Martin shared
Maybe
his order. We're gonna send
Maybe
out
it's just, maybe it's the salt water coming in from through the windows, and that's what makes it. It was a joke. Never mind.
No, definitely. Sorry, I do apologize. I was stepping there for 1 second. Just double check. It's the founder of Brook Laddie that's just stepped down very recently.
Oh yeah.
I was worried there for a second, but you also have that kind of almost sort of salty sweetness to it as well. And again, this is one of the reasons why I find Scotch whiskey so interesting, because there is no salt. We put whiskey through mass spectrometers, and we've tried to find out why there's salt in Scottish single malt whiskey. And some distillers will tell you that it's to do with casks, and it's to do with cask influences. And if you ever get a chance, we released a new 155 this month, 155.3, which is a peated Israeli whiskey that has been finished off in an ex-Laphroaig barrel. I think the US market is 155.2 as an exclusive, but I don't know. But for me, this is what I've really found quite interesting, is it's the barrels that can influence the flavors of taste coming through as well. This being a refill ex-bourbon cask, you are getting that kind of almost classic Islay malt coming through, but you're also getting that almost kind of ashy breath on the palate as well. And I must say, Matt, I'm very jealous. I wish I had a cigar right now.
Yeah, and it's a Bolivar. You got to pair a Bolivar with these.
Oh, well, what's interesting with that, just on a really random side note, is it a Cuban or American Bolivar?
Cuban. Casa del Habana.
Oh, that's a good one then, because it's different cigars for different brands for different markets as well. But it was for me, I love the pairing as well. I have to say, very, very well, kind of sort of matches the kind of deep, rich ashiness to it. But for me, this one is a really kind of, it's a sit down and a sipper kind of style dram. Has that heavy TCP, a little bit of germling, a little bit of ashy smokiness to it as well. But what I really like about it for me is, I think the whole kind of nature of what we do here is, for a society, is very different and very unusual. And it's got these kind of different flavors and different styles coming through. And if you think, all these whiskies here have been come from the same barley, the same stills, the same water, the same dunnage, the same pot stills, and yet you're getting very different flavors for every cask. And this is one of the reasons why I think the whole kind of SMWS concept of single cask is fantastic. And it's got that whole kind of different style of things as well.
So Alan, this might be a weird question, but does the society keep bottles? Because all of the drams we tasted today were in the 200 plus from Laphroaig. Are there bottles that are being kept for, I don't know, special occasions or VIP member? I don't know.
So there are no whiskies that are ever kept aside for VIP members. Each member gets a fair and equal opportunity access to these bottles as well. I know it sounds like a company thing, but it is just straight across the board. However, there are bottles that we have set aside in what we call our archive selection. So these are whiskies that have won awards. So we have bottles set aside that have won the San Francisco Gold, the Japanese Spirit Award Gold, that kind of stuff as well. So we've got bottles set aside for that we think will win gold and have won gold as well. At Bath Street, what I try and do is, so my tenure at Queen Street was very much led by the whole kind of almost feast or famine with peat and sherry for a long time. So with Bath Street, I do kind of try and curate what gets released out for the bar. So if you come to see us at Bath Street and ask for a dram of sherry or a dram of peated, I still try and make sure there's something sherry and peated on the bar at all times, where some other venues might struggle with that kind of sort of allocation of cask style. And for me, what I try and make sure is that if you're visiting us from America, if you're visiting us from Indonesia, Singapore, Taiwan, Australia, Japan, you come in, you get a chance to try some really truly unique cask offerings that the society can do as well. So there are bottles held aside at Bath Street that will be out of stock, but these will be for the bar exclusively. So just to make sure we have that varietal available for you to try by the dram when you come in.
That makes sense. Thank you.
I thought you kept every one of the 0.1s as well, or at least there's a 0.1 of every single one at the original location.
So there is a point, certainly at Bath Street, I've got a 0.1 set aside since 140, I think.
But at the original one, there's every 0.1.
I would assume so, yes.
Yeah. The one in the
Leith in the vaults. I don't think they have all of them though. They have all the old.
They have them on display.
Yeah, I know they have the old ones, but they're missing a lot. They might not have them like.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Okay.
Yeah. So I think Leith have the 0.1s up until when the society was taken over by Glenmorangie. And then once Glenmorangie took over, that really wasn't a thing, because When Glenmorangie owned the society was viewed as a bit of a dumping ground for casks as well, for distilleries that didn't really want to deal with any of these casks. And a prime example is stuff like Lagavulin, Edradour, Balvenie, Scapa, that kind of stuff. You will not find them with the society anymore, just because we do not have a cask agreement with them. That might change. We have had Inchgower, we have had Glengarry come back to us fairly recently as well. So we have had this kind of change in demographic coming through as well. And I think that can only speak positively going forward is that we are seeing more casks coming to us now that haven't been released in the past. And we are seeing new distilleries coming to us as well, which for me makes it really great as well. Well, thank you very much, Griffin. Much appreciate that. But Minecrafting is key. But also as well is that I think the society's now got to a point where we are directly answerable to members. So if members want to see certain things, if there's loud enough voice, we have to readjust our kind of view to it as well. And we have this whole kind of, I think, ethos with the cask as well, where we have our new dunnage warehouse, and we have, because it used to be we rented our dunnage warehouse off a company known as Russell's out in Hillington. We have our own warehouse now, and we have over 25,000 casks in bond. And we have our own bottling line as well. So I will say now there might be a few glitches with bottling sent out. We're still ironing out the kinks with the bottling lines. It's been a little bit of an issue, but also as well, we are kind of growing and developing. We are almost re-establishing ourselves as a private individual entity on the market as well. What I would say as well, if anybody does have any questions, queries, or if you think, right, I really wish I'd asked them this, or even if you've got that bottle of SMWS whiskey sitting in your cabinet that you don't know anything about, just send me a message on Instagram or email. I can go look in places I'm not supposed to look and try and find out a bit more information for you as well.
Yeah.
Alan, another thing on what Oprah said, one thing that I thought was funny is Alan used to keep all the American releases. And initially he used to keep 2 of every bottle because if any broke in shipping, he would replace it. So he cut back and started going down to 1 of every bottle. And the only reason I know this is one of my bottles never made it. It got back to them broken. And his daughter sent me a text saying, you know, we're going to send you ours because yours broke. And I'm like, don't worry about it. Just send me a different one when it comes out. And they're like, no, you bought this one. You deserve it. So he was missing 1 Kalila from his set. But other than that, he had every American bottle.
Oh. It's also very interesting because, I mean, I've got a Kalila in my collection that is for the Japanese market. But it was one that was matured in exotic cargo, and head office said, right, well, we've got that set aside here, have that. And that's what I really like about the society being a whole kind of nature of what we do is the fact that we have these different styles coming through. Interesting you mentioned Armagnac. Armagnac is a bit of an interesting kind of deal with us at the moment. So cognac, I would expect us to see us paring back just because of cost of cask. So we do have a few cognac casks in the warehouse. We do have a few Armagnac casks in the warehouse as well. So it is coming back. But we have done the Kalila Armagnac cask was absolutely fantastic as well. But there's a few interesting ones.
Well, from here, I'm going to share the results of the poll. This has been a lot of fun. This has been a great tasting, great drams. Alan, every single time we all have you, we learn something new. So thank you for that. And I'll hit share here, so I think you all can see the results now. Hopefully you can.
What was Alan's favorite?
I wouldn't want to prejudice the results.
Well, I didn't get to vote because I held it. Mine was 29.278, so it's a tie for second and fourth.
Mine was 29.248, just because working with the society, I'm very blessed with what I get a chance to try, and I'm very lucky with the whiskies that I get a chance to try as well, because everything that comes to the bar is, I always make sure I try it just so I know the flavors that I'm recommending and everything. And this was released, and I follow the US arm of the company on Facebook, and I saw this bottling get released, and I desperately wanted to try it because I'd never had an oily and coastal Laphroaig done that way before as well. So it was, yeah, that was my favorite by pure virtue of the fact that I'd never had that cask before and never had a red wine Laphroaig before. So that was my favorite for individuality.
Happy to help, man.
I do really appreciate that as well.
Long distance
connection. You gave me a cigar. It's only fair.
Anybody else have any thoughts on the results? Anything that surprised you, or anybody that voted for one of the 2 winning ones felt like, you know?
No one liked STR.
Nobody liked STR. Yeah, I liked it. I would drink it. Yeah, I mean, it was not for it was very expensive, but it's unique.
I think going back to the first one, the 248, now after the tasting, it does taste better. Yeah. Sorry, better.
So you're the
So-
one person that voted for 248. Is that what you're lobbying?
No. I was 213, but it does taste better. I wasn't too fond of it when I had it first, but I don't know if it's because I'm palate fatigued or something, and it's
First bias.
maybe.
Also, as well, I think for me, it's one of these things where I grew up in hospitality. I've been in hospitality since I was 18. I'm now 34. And one of the key things that's drilled into your head whenever you first start in hospitality, you clear empty glasses. If you see an empty glass on the table, take it away. And there was a time at Queen Street where, when I was working there, and there was a gent that had bought a dram of Ardbeg from us, and he was sitting there sniffing the empty glass, and he settled up his bill and walked out the building. Came back the next morning, put the dram glass on the bar and gave us a tip and said, "I'm really sorry about that." And what he'd been up doing is he'd been up sniffing the glass all night because the whiskey had changed and evolved in the glass. So when you guys do come to Bath Street, if I am the one that's serving you, I will always ask, can I take the empty glass of whiskey away from you? Because for me, you have exactly, I agree with that, Jeff, is you have these development of flavors and those changing tastes and that kind of growth in the glass as well. So you do get a really interesting flavor coming through. And it's almost, the best way I can describe it is almost like you see these whiskies developing, and each time you come back, even if you try the same 3 drams, you will notice some change coming through as well. Because at the end of the day, these whiskies are cask strength. So these whiskies are the strength that they are in cask. You put them into the, you put them into the glass, they're still evaporating. If you walk into Queen Street, you might notice a slight smell of whiskey on the air. That's not because the guys don't know how to clean the venue. It's literally because they've been serving whiskey that long that whiskey is ingrained into the floorboards in that place. If you walk into Leith, you might smell whiskey. And again, and this is one of the kind of a favorite story I'd share before I go, is the vaults when it was first opened, that is our spiritual home. It's in front of every single bottle, every single glass. The vaults was a straw dust covered floor with casks mounted all the way around the sides, and they had an honesty box system where you would go up, help yourself to the cask, and then pay what you thought you needed to pay into the honesty box, and then go on your way. So that's how we were established. And for me, that's what I really like about it, is that we still maintain that almost sense where, certainly I can speak for Bath Street, if there's a whiskey that you're not sure about, that you want to try, we'll give you a sample of it. We're not going to say no. And for me, this is one of the reasons why I like about it, is that we're always happy to share whiskey more than anything else. So that's what I quite like about the job anyway at the moment. So
Well, as we usually do, we have 5-10 minutes left. It's an opportunity. If anybody has any last-minute questions, please think of those. We'll get those in. And Alan, in a few minutes, will ask you for your final thoughts, as we usually do. Any final thoughts you have on this tasting? What stood out to you? What's something that you'll take away from this as well? And we're very thankful, of course, for having you. A bit of housekeeping. We have a couple in-person events in New York. July 16th, we're doing a whiskey dinner for anybody that's local here.
It's probably not July 16th, though.
August 16th. Sorry. Thanks, Martin. And we do have a big Laphroaig tasting of all 15 single casks that released to the US. We're waiting on a date for that, but you'll be the first to know. And then anybody going to the whiskey show in London, we're doing a dinner. So please think about that if you're going. I know Matt Lauren's going, and hopefully to see other people as well. And yeah, so this tasting was really unique. These bottles, I've been sitting on them for a while. The last one I think was probably this January that I grabbed, and I've been talking to Alan for a while. Right after we did the Sherry 29's, we've been talking about getting another 29 tasting because they're so unique. They're so rare. A lot of people are holding them and then slowly drinking them over time. But it's cool to kind of come back at certain parts, once a year, once every 2 years, to see what's going on with these 29's. And to drink a STR, for example, or a wine cask this time is very different than the sherries that we drank, a year ago, 2 years ago. I don't remember when it was. So I think it's always cool to see what the society is doing and changing as well over time. And these drams were released anywhere from like 2017 to 2022. So you have a nice segment of time that you all have tried. in some of the better 29s that were released. So again, thank you for your support. Anybody have any questions for anybody here or Alan? Any clarifications, comments, thoughts before we hand it over to him for a last thought?
I just want to say one thing that was funny when he was hitting on the empty glasses is that one of my favorite things to do the day after like a whiskey festival is go back to my Glencairn from the night before. You know, if you don't rinse it out from the last pour, it's always interesting to see what sort of blended notes are there from the night before, if you feel for where you've been.
The 4th dram dried glass already smells amazing. It's turning white. It smells amazing. The 278, I think it was.
Number 4, you said, James?
Yeah, number
Yeah,
4.
278. That was my favorite one. Yeah.
Yeah.
The dried glass smells amazing. It's like a bouquet of fresh flowers and other stuff. Joe and Kelly had a question for you, Alan. Are there any other distilleries that you're interested in focusing on? And Joe and Kelly, if you have any more to add to that. And then Alan, right after that, let's go right into your final thoughts.
So at the moment, so we have just actually signed a deal to buy whiskey from a new distillery in New Zealand. So that's going to be our next kind of major SMWS whiskey. As far as myself, I'm kind of a roving jack of all trades kind of thing. I do stuff like this. I do it privately, and for me, I just love trying new spirit. I love trying new whiskeys, new everything. And it sounds a bit bizarre, but I will go to, if you're ever in Glasgow, I'd recommend visit the Pot Still and the Bon Accord. Brilliant whiskey bars. And I often go there just because I go to these different things. I agree, Jeff. I love Old Grain. Old Grain is fantastic as well. But I think we have these different development of flavors and everything. And for me, the distilleries that I like to focus on is the ones that challenge the perception of flavors. So I like the 155, for example, because it's an Israeli whiskey. And if you think the Israeli whiskeys are going to be doing, the Israelis are doing whiskey, then Israelis are doing whiskeys, that messes with the perception. Also, so when I do tastings at the SMWS venue in Bath Street, I often put in a Pendeeren or a Welsh whiskey or an Indian whiskey or an English whiskey and just not tell anyone, because they'll try this and go, oh, this is great. And the second you tell them this is a New World whiskey, they go, oh no, I don't like this anymore. So for me, I think it's all about trying blind. This is what I quite like about the society, is that we have these new kind of styles coming through as well. I hope that answers the question anyway.
Yeah, that answers the question, Alan. So Alan, thank you again. It's always great seeing you. A lot of here are all old and new friends now. So any last thoughts on, you had preconceptions coming in. I know you saw the bottles, you didn't taste them. You look at color, context, age, ABV. What's your takeaway and what do you leave us with for the next time? It was just a week or two ago that we saw you at Brooklady. So what do you leave us with?
So for me, I think personally speaking, the one that messed with me the most was 29.286, the Oloroso Barrique, much lighter than I expected, because when I get the bottles the exact same way you guys get them, which is just the cask number, the ABV, and the year. That's it. I can't look into cask sort of styles, and I tend to shy away from that until the actual night before the tasting, because I don't want my perception to be clouded. In addition, when I try the whiskies with you guys, I try them blind. This is the first time I've tried them as well. And for me, I think the whiskey that I will take away with being really truly unique will be the 29.248, because it reminds me of what the society is about, which is unique and different whiskies. But it also reminds me why I think I'm such a huge fan of this style of tasting, which is clubbies getting together and just sharing and just getting whiskey out into the open market. And for me, this is one of the reasons why I'm a big fan of this style as well, because a whiskey could sit in a cupboard for many, many years and just be completely forgotten, or could be cracked out and shared out amongst friends and everything. And that kind of, it sounds a bit cheesy, but it's one of the reasons why I love my job, is that it gives me a chance to speak about whiskey, chat about whiskey, but also really kind of sort of show that I find this distillery, the 29 Laphroaig alone, to be one of the most interesting Islay distilleries, because I have a personal connection towards it, but also it's everybody sort of has that initial bad experience of Laphroaig being TCP, germaline, ash, paint stripper. They had it when they were, 21 for you guys, 17 for us, 18, sorry, for us. That was a bad slip. But it's kind of that first experience of Scotch whiskey kind of thing. And for me, I think it's got that really nice, interesting flavor to it. And these whiskies here, these 6, are really kind of diverse. And what's quite interesting for me is that even though this whiskey wasn't my favorite, the Festival Oloroso Barrique 29.286 is the only bottle that I've completely finished, because typically I try and save a little bit aside so my partner can try them as well. And the sherry one was actually the only one that I finished tonight as well. So for me, I find that really interesting and unusual from that aspect as well.
Awesome. That sounds like Jeff. Jeff sent me the same thing. It's like, if I need to go look at those other bottles on the shelf. Well, thank you so much, Alan. I'm going to stop the recording. Some of us can stay here and hang out for more. And you're more than welcome to as well. I know it's getting late there. So thank you for spending your Sunday evening with us. Thank you for all your knowledge and passion about whiskey. And I'm sure I can speak for everybody that we appreciate all your time. So thank you very much.
Well, we'll
Thanks,
see.
Alan.
Any questions, queries, just drop me a line, drop me an email, drop me an Instagram. I'm more than happy to help any way I can. And pop on by Bath Street. We'll get you started. Doors always open. Take care,
Thanks,
guys.
mate.
Have a night.
A lot of us here have seen you now, Alan. Like over time, we've all come to visit. Like,
It's getting worrying now. I tell you, it's getting worrying. I can't get rid of you guys.
Now you're gonna have to